All right, let's jump right in. Today we're tackling judgments, the legal kind, not just our everyday opinions. Judgments, specifically how they're executed, satisfied, what happens afterward, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
You sent us a ton of stuff on Rule 39. Looks like some serious legal stuff from Golden Notes 2024. No worries, we've got you covered.
Yeah.
We're going to break it down, make it crystal clear. So no more feeling lost in legal jargon land.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, first up, the notes talk about final judgment, which sounds straightforward. But then they throw in this curveball. Final can have two different meanings in this context.
Right, two meanings of final. It can be confusing.
What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's really important to get this. Final can mean the judgment is ready to be enforced, like game over, the referee blows the whistle.
Okay.
But it can also mean all appeals are done, completely exhausted.
Oh, I see.
Like you've won the championship, you've got the trophy in hand.
So sometimes a judgment can be acted upon even if appeals are still possible?
You got it. That's where discretionary execution comes in. Think of it like a safety net in the legal system.
Okay.
Say a judgment involves something that could spoil quickly, like perishable goods.
Right.
Or maybe there's a good chance the defendant might try to run away, flee the country.
Oh, so they can't just dodge the consequences.
Exactly. A judge can allow execution before the appeals process is totally finished, just to make sure the judgment actually means something.
So it's kind of like a chef adding a pinch of magic to save a dish from going bad.
I like that analogy.
But the notes were really clear that judges don't just grant discretionary execution all the time.
Right. It's not automatic.
And it seems like there needs to be a really good reason.
Absolutely. A strong reason. And it needs to be explained clearly in a special order.
So they can't just say, oh, I feel like granting it today.
Not at all. It has to be clear that taking action immediately is necessary to protect the whole point of the judgment.
Got it. So there are safeguards in place. All right, so we've got this final judgment. Sometimes it can be enforced right away. Sometimes it needs a judge's okay. But how does someone actually start that whole enforcement process?
Well, Rule 39 gives us two main paths. Execution by motion or by independent action.
Two paths, okay.
It depends on the timeline. Yeah. If it's been less than 5 years since the judgment became final, then execution by motion is the way to go.
The faster route.
Yeah, think of it like a direct line to the court. You're saying, hey, remember that judgment? Time to make it happen.
Okay, makes sense. But what if more than 5 years have passed? Is that judgment just gone, like forgotten?
Not necessarily. You can still try to enforce it, but you'll need to take a different path, an independent action.
A different path.
Yeah, it's basically like filing a whole new lawsuit to revive that old judgment, bring it back from the dead.
Oh, interesting. So it's like giving it a second chance, a fresh coat of paint.
Exactly. You're reminding the court, hey, this is still out there, still needs to be dealt with.
So judgments do have a sort of expiration date, but there are ways to work around that if needed.
Right. And, the notes mention some situations where you might still be able to use a motion even after 5 years.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, like if the delay was the debtor's fault, they were stalling things.
Trying to run out the clock.
Exactly. Or if both sides agreed to hold off on enforcement for a while.
So there's some flexibility built into the system.
It highlights how the legal system tries to be adaptable to all sorts of different situations.
That's good to know. It seems like there's usually a way to move forward, as long as you know the rules of the game. Speaking of moving forward, let's dig into those tools for enforcing judgments.
Right.
We talked about money judgments earlier, but what about judgments for specific actions? Those seem trickier.
They can be a bit more complex because it's not just about money. It's about actions that might be hard to measure with money or replace with money.
Okay, I'm listening.
For example, a judgment might require someone to turn over a specific property.
Like a house or something?
Or to hand over some important documents.
I see.
Or even to tear down a structure they built illegally.
So how do you force someone to actually do something? What if they just refuse?
Well, Rule 39 has some mechanisms for that. Sometimes the court can appoint someone else to do it for them.
Like hire a contractor or something?
Exactly. And guess who pays for it?
The person who was supposed to do it in the first place.
You got it. It's like saying, fine, if you won't do it, we'll find someone who will, and you're footing the bill.
So, if a judgment says someone has to hand over a one-of-a-kind antique, but they're being stubborn,
the court could literally send someone to get that antique and deliver it to the rightful owner.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. But what if, in this whole process of enforcing a judgment, someone else gets caught in the middle? Like, what if the court accidentally tries to seize property that belongs to someone who's completely uninvolved?
That's a great point, and it's where this idea of tertiaria comes in. It's a safeguard in the law. Think of it like a, hey, wait a minute moment.
Okay.
It lets a third party step in and say, hold on, that property you're trying to take, that's mine, not the debtor's.
So it's like a protection mechanism so innocent bystanders don't get caught in the crossfire?
Exactly. The notes had this great example. Imagine someone's being evicted from a rental property, right? But their friend's car is parked in the driveway.
Oh, no, that's a bad situation.
Yeah. So the friend could use tertiaria to stop their car from being taken along with the debtor's stuff.
That's a relief. It's like a get-out-of-jail-free card for property that doesn't belong to the debtor. What about when the debtor's being sneaky, like hiding their assets? Is there any way to track down that hidden treasure?
You bring up another great point, and luckily Rule 39 has a tool for that too. It's called Examination of the Judgment of Blaker.
Okay, that sounds intense.
It basically lets the winning side ask the court to make the debtor come in and answer questions about their assets and finances under oath.
Oh, wow. So it's like a legal interrogation getting down to the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. It can be really helpful in uncovering hidden assets or any inconsistencies in the debtor's financial story. Then the court can decide the best way to enforce that judgment.
This is amazing. It seems like with every layer of Rule 39 we peel back, there's a whole new level of complexity.
You're absolutely right, and we're just getting started. Next time, we're going to explore the long-term effects of judgments. We'll even talk about this concept called res judicata.
Res judicata.
It's all about preventing never-ending legal battles over the same issue.
I'm intrigued. Can't wait to dive into that.
Stay tuned for more.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive on judgments. Before we got into the nitty-gritty of money judgments, we were talking about how a judgment can be enforced, like as a matter of right or as a matter of discretion.
Right.
It seems like there's a pretty big difference between those two.
Oh yeah, huge difference. When it's a matter of right, the court basically has to enforce the judgment.
No questions asked.
Right, as soon as it becomes final and executory, I think is the term. It's like you've got this golden ticket, guaranteeing you'll get what the court decided.
Makes sense. So no jumping through extra hoops in that case.
Yeah.
But what about when it's up to the judge's discretion? What makes them say yes or no to that?
That's where it gets kind of tricky. The judge has to consider a bunch of different things.
I bet.
And the person asking for it, they really need to give the judge some solid reasons why it needs to happen right away, even before all the appeals are done.
I see.
Like, let's say the judgment involves something that could lose value really fast, like perishable goods.
Right, those can't just sit around forever.
Exactly. Or if there's a chance the person who lost might try to skip town, disappear or hide their assets.
So they can't just avoid the consequences by playing games.
Exactly. So in those cases, a judge might grant discretionary execution just to make sure the judgment actually means something in the end.
Makes sense. So it's like a safeguard to prevent people from dodging the system. It's like keeping those wheels of justice turning, even if someone's trying to throw a wrench in the gears.
I like that.
The notes also mentioned two main ways to start the whole execution process.
Yeah.
Execution by motion and execution by independent action.
Right.
What's the difference between those two?
It mainly depends on how much time has passed. If you're trying to enforce it within 5 years of the judgment becoming final, execution by motion is the usual way to go.
The 5-year rule.
Yeah, think of it like a direct line to the court. You're saying, hey, remember that judgment we talked about? Let's get this thing moving.
Makes sense. But what if it's been like more than 5 years? Does that judgment just expire?
Not quite. You can still try to enforce it. You just have to take a different route. That's where the independent action comes in.
So it's not a lost cause?
Nope. It's basically like filing a whole new lawsuit to breathe some life back into that old judgment. You're reminding the court, hey, this is still out there, remember?
Interesting. So judgments kind of have a statute of limitations, but there are ways to get around that if you need to. It's like that saying, justice delayed is not always justice denied.
Right.
Right. And, the notes did mention some situations where you might still be able to use emotion even after 5 years.
Oh, really? Like what kind of situations?
Well, for example, if the delay happened because the debtor was doing something to stall things.
So they were trying to run out the clock.
Exactly. Or, maybe both sides agreed to put things on hold for a bit.
So there's a bit of flexibility built in.
Yeah. The legal system tries to adapt to different situations as much as possible.
That's good to know. Seems like there's usually some way to make things happen, as long as you understand the rules. Speaking of making things happen, let's get back to those tools for enforcing different types of judgments.
Okay.
We already talked about money judgments, but what about judgments for specific actions? Those seem a bit trickier, right? Yeah, they can be a bit more complex because you're not just dealing with a dollar amount. It's about getting someone to do something specific, which can be harder to, measure with money.
Right, I see what you mean.
For instance, a judgment might say someone has to transfer a certain piece of property.
Like a house or a piece of land.
Or maybe they have to hand over some important documents.
Wow.
Or even demolish a structure they built illegally.
So how do you force someone to actually do something? What if they just flat out refuse?
Well, Rule 39 gives us a few options. Sometimes the court can appoint someone else to do it on their behalf.
Like a designated doer.
Yeah, something like that. And the person who was supposed to do it in the first place, they're the ones who have to pay for it.
So it's like saying, fine, you don't want to do it, we'll find someone who will, but you're paying for it.
Right. It's about making sure things actually get done, even if the person is being difficult.
Makes sense. But what happens if, during all of this, someone else's property gets caught in the middle? Like, what if the court tries to seize something that actually belongs to a third party?
That's a really good question, and it brings up this important legal concept called tertiaria. It's like a safety valve in the system.
A safety valve.
Yeah. It allows a third party to come in and say, hold on a second, that property you're trying to take, that's mine, not the debtor's.
So it's like a way to protect innocent bystanders from getting swept up in someone else's legal battle.
Exactly. The notes use this example. Imagine someone is being evicted from a rental property, and their friend's car is parked in the driveway.
Oh, that could get messy.
So that friend could use tertiaria to prevent their car from being taken along with all the debtor's stuff.
So it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card for property that doesn't actually belong to the debtor. That's reassuring.
It is. It's there to make sure the process is fair.
Now, what about those situations where the debtor is being sneaky and hiding assets? Like, is there any way to uncover that hidden treasure?
That's a great point, and luckily Rule 39 has a tool for that too. It's called examination of the judgment obligor.
Examination of the judgment obligor. That sounds serious.
It basically means the winning side can ask the court to force the debtor to come in and answer questions about their finances, all under oath.
Wow, so it's like a legal interrogation, getting down to the bottom of things.
Got it. It can be a very effective way to find any hidden assets or inconsistencies in their financial story. Then the court can decide the best way to enforce that judgment.
That's fascinating. It seems like every time we peel back a layer of Rule 39, there's this whole other level of complexity.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
And we're not done yet.
Yeah.
Next up, we're going to talk about the long-term effects of judgments. We'll even delve into this concept called res judicata, which is all about preventing those endless legal battles over the same issue.
Sounds intriguing. Can't wait to learn more about that. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of judgments. We've been exploring how they're enforced, how the legal system makes those decisions stick.
Right.
But it's not all about chasing down debtors and seizing assets, right? There's this whole other side to judgments, like their long-term impact, the ripple effect they have.
Absolutely. Enforcing the judgment is just one part of it. We also need to understand what happens afterward, how judgments can actually shape future legal actions and really create a sense of finality in disputes.
Right, like once everything's settled, what's the lasting impact of that judgment? The notes talk about a judgment being binding and conclusive, which sounds pretty official.
Yeah, it is. And Rule 39 lays out all sorts of different scenarios and explains what effect the judgment has in each one. For example, if a judgment decides who owns a certain piece of property, that decision is it. It's conclusive.
So no more arguing about it, case closed.
Exactly. It's like saying, okay, this matter is settled, no more back and forth.
So it prevents any future disputes about that specific thing. No more going back and forth in court forever.
But the notes also point out that sometimes a judgment might have a more limited effect.
Right. The scope of a judgment's impact can definitely vary depending on what the case was about. For instance, in cases about wills, the judgment might be conclusive about whether the will is valid, but it doesn't necessarily prove the person is actually dead.
Oh, interesting. So it's like one piece of the puzzle, but maybe not the whole picture.
Exactly. It's really important to understand the specific effect of each judgment because it helps us figure out what's really settled and what questions are still up in the air.
Now, what about this term res judicata? We've mentioned it a few times, and it seems like a big deal when talking about how final a judgment is.
Oh yeah, res judicata is a huge concept in law. It's a Latin term, basically means a matter judged. And the main idea is to prevent the same people from arguing about the same thing over and over again in court.
Makes sense. So no endless legal battles. Right. It helps the legal system be more efficient and gives people a sense of closure. Legal matters have to come to an end at some point, so people can move on.
It's all about finding resolution, not getting stuck in a legal loop forever. The notes used a great example about neighbors arguing about a property line. Res judicata would stop them from constantly taking each other to court over the same argument.
Exactly. It prevents things from dragging on forever.
Okay, but not all judgments come from within our own country, right? What happens when we're dealing with judgments from other countries? Do they have the same power here?
That's a great question, and it brings us to foreign judgments. Rule 39 actually outlines how these judgments are treated within our legal system. They aren't automatically enforceable here. They have to go through a process of recognition and then enforcement by our courts.
So there's an extra step, like a checkpoint.
You could say that. It's about making sure foreign judgments fit with our laws and meet our standards before they can be enforced here. It's a balancing act, trying to cooperate with other legal systems while still upholding our own.
This has been incredible. We've gone from the basics of enforcing a judgment all the way to understanding its long-term effects, even looking at how judgments from other countries work. I feel like I've learned so much about Rule 39 and how much it impacts our legal world.
I'm glad to hear that. It just goes to show how important it is to really understand these legal concepts. Judgments aren't just some abstract ideas. They have real-world consequences, that shape people's lives, enforce agreements, and ultimately help maintain the rule of law.
Couldn't have said it better myself. To our listener, we hope this has been informative and maybe even empowering. Rule 39 might seem overwhelming at first glance, but as we've seen, it's not some unsolvable puzzle. It's all about ensuring things are fair, that disputes get resolved effectively, and that there's a sense of finality. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into this fascinating world of law.
Well said. The more you know about the legal system, the better prepared you'll be to deal with it.
That's a wrap on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore the ins and outs of judgments and Rule 39. Until next time, stay curious and remember, knowledge is power.